The rain came down in sheets that November night, turning the Philadelphia streets into rivers of neon and shadow. Thomas Spencer pulled his jacket tighter as he walked past the shuttered storefronts on Walnut Street, his work boots splashing through puddles that reflected the amber glow of streetlights. At 42, Thomas had learned to find beauty in the mundane. The way water beaded on glass, the distant hum of traffic, the solitude of a city that never quite slept. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. He just finished a double shift at the warehouse, loading pallets until his shoulders burned and his hands cramped. The overtime would help. It always helped. Sarah's school supplies weren't going to pay for themselves, and the landlord had already sent 2 notices about next month's rent. Thomas didn't mind the work. Honest labor had a rhythm to it, a dignity that couldn't be measured in dollars alone. The alley shortcut between Walnut and Sansom would save him 10 minutes. Thomas knew these streets the way a sailor knows constellations, by necessity, by survival. He turned into the narrow passage, where dumpsters lined brick walls covered in decades of graffiti. The rain muffled the city's usual symphony, replacing it with a percussive drumming on metal and pavement. That's when he heard it. A groan. Low and desperate. Thomas stopped, water streaming down his face. Years of urban living had taught him when to look away, when to keep walking. Philadelphia had shadows that swallowed the curious. But something in that sound, the rawness of it, the humanity, made him turn. The man was crumpled against the brick wall like discarded newspaper, his expensive suit torn and dark with blood. Rain washed red streams across the concrete. His face was a mess of cuts and swelling, one eye already purpled shut. But it was his hands that caught Thomas's attention. Manicured fingers pressed against his ribs, trying to hold something together that had been broken apart. "Jesus!" Thomas breathed, dropping to his knees. The cold water soaked through his jeans instantly. "Hey, can you hear me? Stay with me, buddy." The man's good eye flickered open. Even through the damage, Thomas could see intelligence there, and fear. The man tried to speak, blood bubbling at his lips. His designer watch caught the streetlight. A Patek Philippe, Thomas realized, worth more than Thomas made in a year. "Don't talk," Thomas said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling 911. You're going to be okay." The man's hand shot out, gripping Thomas's wrist with surprising strength. He shook his head frantically, terror flooding his battered features. "No," he managed, the word thick and wet. "No police. Please." Thomas hesitated. Every instinct screamed to call for help, to let professionals handle this. But the man's grip was iron, his eye pleading with an intensity that transcended words. Thomas had seen desperation before, in mirrors, in his daughter's face when he'd explained why Christmas would be small that year. But this was different. This was a man convinced that salvation and damnation wore the same uniform. "Okay," Thomas said softly. "Okay, no police. But I need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" The man tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Thomas caught him, feeling the dead weight of injured muscle and bone. He was heavier than he looked, solid despite the elegant frame. Thomas positioned himself under the man's arm, taking most of his weight across his shoulders. They moved through the rain like a 3-legged creature, stumbling and swaying. The man's breathing came in short gasps, each one a small agony. Blood dripped onto Thomas's jacket, mixing with the rain. Thomas's apartment was 6 blocks away. It might as well have been 6 miles. "What's your name?" Thomas asked, partly to keep the man conscious, partly to ground himself in the surreal nightmare of the moment. "Vincent," the man whispered. "Vincent Caruso." Thomas didn't recognize the name, but he recognized quality when he saw it. The ruined suit was Armani. The shoes, now scuffed and bloody, were handmade Italian leather. This was a man who lived in a different world than Thomas. One with penthouses and private jets and problems that couldn't be solved with overtime and budgeting. They reached Thomas's building, a converted brownstone that had seen better decades. The elevator was broken again, naturally, so Thomas half-carried Vincent up 3 flights of stairs. By the time they reached his door, Both men were gasping, and Vincent had lost consciousness twice. Thomas's apartment was small but clean, a source of quiet pride. One bedroom for Sarah, a pull-out couch in the living room for himself, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The walls held Sarah's artwork, bright splashes of color that pushed back against the beige monotony. A photograph on the bookshelf showed a younger Thomas with a woman and a baby. His wife, Marie, before cancer had stolen her 5 years ago. He laid Vincent on the couch, elevating his legs with throw pillows. The man's breathing was shallow but steady. Thomas stripped away the ruined jacket and shirt, revealing a canvas of bruises and cuts. 3 ribs felt broken, maybe 4. The gash along Vincent's side needed stitches, but Thomas cleaned it as best he could with hydrogen peroxide and butterfly bandages from the medicine cabinet. He worked through the night, changing cold compresses, monitoring Vincent's breathing, administering careful doses of over-the-counter pain medication. Thomas called his supervisor and took a sick day he couldn't afford. Sarah was with his sister for the weekend, thank God. She didn't need to see this. Vincent woke in fragments, confused, disoriented, sometimes crying out in languages Thomas didn't understand. During the lucid moments, he gripped Thomas's hand and whispered thank you over and over until the words became a prayer. By Sunday morning, Vincent could sit up without groaning. The swelling around his eye had gone down enough that he could open it partially. He looked at Thomas across the battered coffee table. Steam rising from the mug of instant coffee Thomas had pressed into his hands. "Why did you help me?" Vincent asked. His voice was clearer now, cultured, carrying the ghost of an Italian accent. "You could have walked away. Should have walked away." Thomas shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "Couldn't leave you there to die. That's not who I am. Most people would have." Vincent sipped the coffee, wincing as it touched his split lip. "Most people would have robbed me and left me for dead. You saved my life, Thomas Spencer. That's not a small thing. You remember my name. I remember everything." Vincent set down the mug carefully, as if it were fine china instead of a chipped yard sale find. "The things I said in my delirium, the way you kept vigil, the fact that you have a daughter whose artwork covers these walls." He gestured to a crayon drawing of a house with a purple sky. "Sarah, age 8, if that picture is accurate." "9 now," Thomas said quietly. "She just had a birthday, and no mother in the picture. I'm sorry. Cancer. 5 years ago." Thomas stood, needing movement to push back the old grief. "You need to eat something. I'll make eggs." Over breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, simple but warm, Vincent told his story in careful, measured words. He was a venture capitalist, he explained, but that was corporate speak for a man who made money grow in ways that sometimes skirted legality. He'd gotten involved with the wrong people, made promises he couldn't keep, discovered corruption that powerful men wanted buried. "They wanted me dead," Vincent said, staring at his plate. "My business partner, my supposed friends, they hired men to make me disappear. I barely escaped. If you hadn't found me." "But I did," Thomas interrupted. "And you're alive. What happens now?" Vincent looked up, something fierce and determined burning through the pain. "Now I disappear properly. Get somewhere safe. Figure out who I can trust." He reached into his wallet, miraculously still in his pocket, and pulled out a business card. "This is my attorney. He's clean. If you ever need anything at all, you call him. Tell him Vincent Caruso owes you a life debt." Thomas took the card but said nothing. Life debts sounded like movie dialogue, not reality. He expected never to hear from Vincent Caruso again. He was wrong. 6 months passed like water through fingers. Winter gave way to a Philadelphia spring that exploded in Bradford pear blossoms and crocus blooms. Thomas fell back into his routine: warehouse shifts, parent-teacher conferences, Sunday morning pancakes with Sarah, evenings spent helping with homework and watching her grow into a person with opinions and dreams. Sarah wanted to be a veterinarian. She brought home library books about animal anatomy and practice stitches on her stuffed animals. Thomas watched her careful concentration as she wrapped bandages around a teddy bear's paw and felt his heart expand and break simultaneously. Intelligence like hers needed college, needed opportunities he couldn't provide on a warehouse salary. He picked up extra shifts, started driving for a rideshare service on weekends when Sarah visited his sister, cut his own hair, bought generic everything. The bills still piled up like autumn leaves, relentless, suffocating. The car needed new brakes. The bathroom sink dripped. Sarah needed glasses. Thomas never told anyone about the night he saved Vincent Caruso. What would he say? It felt like a fever dream, that blood-soaked evening and the elegant stranger who disappeared into the dawn. The business card sat in his wallet, growing soft and worn, a talisman of a moment outside his normal life. At the warehouse, Thomas moved through the days with quiet competence. He operated the forklift with precision, loaded trucks with geometric efficiency, broke up disputes between younger workers with a calm word and steady presence. His supervisor, a perpetually harried man named Rodriguez, relied on Thomas in ways that never translated to promotion or meaningful raises. "You're the backbone of this operation, Spencer," Rodriguez said one afternoon, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "Don't know what we'd do without you." Thomas nodded, said thank you, and swallowed the bitter question that rose in his throat. Then why am I still making $14 an hour? But he knew the answer. Backbone was important. Backbone was necessary. Backbone was also easy to take for granted. His coworkers liked him. They invited him to after-shift beers, which he usually declined. They asked about Sarah, showed him pictures of their own kids. A few of the younger guys came to him for advice, about women, about money, about how to keep going when the weight of the world pressed down on your shoulders. "You just do," Thomas told Marcus, a 23-year-old with a new baby and old eyes. "You wake up, you show up, you take care of what's yours. Some days that's heroic. Some days that's just Wednesday. But you keep showing up." Marcus nodded slowly, processing. "You ever think about more, though? Like, this can't be it, right?" Thomas thought about that question long after his shift ended. This can't be it. But what else was there? He dropped out of community college when Marie got sick, when someone needed to work double shifts to pay for treatment that ultimately didn't work. He'd put his dreams in a box labeled later, and later never came. At home, Sarah was growing into a person who asked complicated questions. "Dad, why do some people have so much money they don't know what to do with it, and other people work all the time and still don't have enough?" "That's a good question, sweetheart," Thomas said, helping her with her math homework at the kitchen table. "The world isn't always fair. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to make it better. How do we make it better? We take care of each other. We help when we can. We don't let the unfairness make us cruel." He thought of Vincent Caruso, bleeding in an alley, of the choice to stop instead of walking past. Sometimes the smallest kindness creates the biggest ripples. Sarah considered this, chewing on her pencil. "Like when you helped that homeless man last month. Bought him dinner. Exactly like that. But we're not rich. How come you help people when we barely have enough?" Thomas set down his pen and looked at his daughter. This brilliant, compassionate creature who somehow came from him. "Because that's what it means to be human, Sarah. Having enough isn't about how much money is in your bank account. It's about having enough heart. And we're rich in that." She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her algebra. Thomas watched her work, feeling the familiar ache of fierce love and desperate worry. Her shoes were getting tight. Winter coat wouldn't fit next year. She'd need a computer for middle school. He picked up extra rideshare shifts, drove until 2 in the morning, ferrying drunk college students and tired nurses and people whose stories brushed against his in the intimate anonymity of a dark car. Philadelphia at night was a different creature, vulnerable and honest, stripped of its daytime masks. One fare, a young woman crying in the back seat, reminded him why he kept going. She'd just been fired, she told him. Single mother, rent due, no idea what came next. Thomas drove her home, refused payment, and pressed a $20 bill into her hand before she could protest. "Sometimes we're the person who needs help," he said gently. "Sometimes we're the person who gives it. Both are important." She cried harder, thanked him 5 times, and stumbled into her apartment. Thomas drove away with his gas tank on empty and his spirit somehow full. This was his currency, not money, but moments. Not wealth, but worth. Father's Day approached like a gentle promise. Sarah had been secretive for weeks, working on something in her room with fierce concentration. Thomas pretended not to notice the construction paper and glitter, the hastily hidden drawings. These small mysteries were gifts he refused to spoil. The morning dawned warm and bright, the kind of June day that made you believe in new beginnings. Sarah woke him with breakfast in bed, burnt toast and weak coffee and orange juice in a glass that said "World's Best Dad" in her careful handwriting. "Happy Father's Day," she announced proudly, setting the tray across his lap. "I made everything myself." "Well, Aunt Rachel helped with the stove part." Thomas's throat tightened with emotion. "It's perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, Sarah chattering about her plans for summer. Swim lessons at the community center, the library reading program, maybe camp if they could afford it. Thomas made non-committal noises, calculating costs in his head, already planning which shifts to take. Around noon, someone knocked on the door. Thomas wasn't expecting visitors. His sister had called that morning. Sarah had delivered her handmade card at breakfast, and he'd learned long ago that unannounced guests usually brought trouble. Landlords wanting rent, old friends wanting money, or missionaries wanting souls. But when he opened the door, Vincent Caruso stood in the hallway, and Thomas barely recognized him. The broken man from the alley had been replaced by someone powerful and polished. Vincent wore a tailored gray suit that probably cost more than Thomas's car. His dark hair silver at the temples. His face healed into distinguished lines. Only his eyes were the same, sharp and intelligent and carrying the weight of that November night. "Hello, Thomas," Vincent said softly. For a moment, Thomas could only stare. 6 months had passed, and he'd half convinced himself that Vincent Caruso was a ghost. A story he'd told himself to make the grind of daily life more interesting. "Vincent," Thomas finally managed, "I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I promised myself I would find you when things were safe, when I could properly thank you." Vincent glanced past Thomas into the apartment, where Sarah had appeared in the hallway, curious. "Is this a bad time?" No, come in." Thomas stepped back, suddenly aware of how small his world must look to someone like Vincent. The worn furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, the way everything was clean but old, functional but tired. Vincent entered with the careful grace of someone used to moving through spaces with intention. He nodded to Sarah. "You must be Sarah. Your father told me about you." "I'm Vincent. Are you Dad's friend?" Sarah asked with the direct honesty of children. "I'm someone who owes your father a great debt," Vincent replied. "And yes, I hope to be his friend." Thomas gestured to the couch, the same one where Vincent had bled and healed. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be lovely, thank you." Vincent sat, and Thomas noticed how he winced slightly, as if old injuries still whispered reminders. "But first, I have something for you." Vincent reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents. He held it for a moment, seeming to weigh not just its physical heft but its implications. "Thomas, that night in the alley, you didn't just save my life. You restored my faith in humanity when I'd lost it. You asked for nothing, expected nothing. That's rare." Vincent extended the envelope. "This is inadequate, but it's a start." Thomas took the envelope slowly, feeling the weight of unknown futures in his hands. "Vincent, you don't owe me anything. I did what anyone should do. But most wouldn't have. Open it." Thomas unsealed the envelope, Sarah peering over his shoulder with undisguised curiosity. Inside were legal documents, pages of dense text and official seals. He scanned the first page, not understanding, then the second, and suddenly the words resolved into meaning that made no sense. This is a trust fund," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For Sarah's education. Full ride to any university she chooses," Vincent confirmed. "Undergraduate, graduate, medical school if she wants it. Room, board, books, everything." Thomas's hands began to shake. The number at the bottom of the page had more zeros than he'd ever seen outside of news articles about lottery winners. Vincent, I can't accept this. You already have. It's done. Irrevocable. Vincent leaned forward, intensity burning in his gaze. But there's more. Keep reading. Thomas turned to the next document, and the world tilted sideways. It was a property deed. For a house. In his name. I don't understand, Thomas said, the papers trembling in his grip. A 4-bedroom house in Chestnut Hill. Good schools, safe neighborhood, backyard for Sarah. Paid in full, no mortgage. It's yours. This is insane, Thomas breathed. This is too much. Way too much. It's not enough, Vincent said fiercely. Do you know what happened after you saved me? I disappeared. Went underground. Spent 3 months collecting evidence, building a case, making sure everyone who wanted me dead ended up in federal custody instead. My business partner is serving 20 years for fraud and attempted murder. The people he hired to kill me flipped on him to save their own skins. Vincent stood, pacing the small living room like a caged tiger. I got my life back, Thomas. My company, my reputation, my future. And I thought about you every single day. Thought about how you didn't hesitate. How you took a stranger into your home. How you asked for nothing. I was just being decent. Decency is a choice, and it's one most people don't make. You chose. That choice has value. Vincent stopped pacing, pinning Thomas with his gaze. But there's one more thing in that envelope. Thomas found it, a single sheet of paper with an offer letter. His eyes scanned the text, not believing what he was reading. You're offering me a job? As director of community outreach for your foundation. $80,000 a year to start. Full benefits, retirement matching. Vincent confirmed. Your job would be to identify people and organizations doing good work in Philadelphia and connect them with resources. You'd have a budget to make real change happen. I need someone with judgment. Someone who understands what people actually need, not what looks good in a press release. Sarah had been quiet, but now she tugged on Thomas's sleeve. Dad? Is this real? Thomas looked down at his daughter, at her wide eyes and hopeful expression, and felt tears threatening. I think so, sweetheart. I know it's overwhelming, Vincent said gently. Take time. Think about it. But Thomas, I didn't come here to pay you off or ease my conscience. I came because that night changed me, reminded me what matters. I've built a fortune, but I'd forgotten how to be human. You taught me again. Thomas set the papers down carefully on the coffee table, as if they might shatter. His mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other like river stones. The house, the education, the job. It was too much. It was impossible. It was everything he'd never let himself dream because dreams like this didn't come true for people like him. Why? Thomas finally asked. Why so much? Why now? Vincent smiled, and for the first time Thomas saw not the polished businessman but the broken man he'd carried through the rain. Because you were there when it mattered. Because your daughter deserves every opportunity. Because I can, and therefore I must. He moved toward the door, giving Thomas space to breathe. Think about it. My number's in the envelope. Call me when you're ready. Vincent, Thomas called as the man reached for the doorknob. Thank you. I don't know what else to say, but thank you. Thank you, Thomas Spencer, for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. After Vincent left, Thomas sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the papers that promised to rewrite his entire existence. Sarah curled up next to him, her small hand finding his. Are we going to be okay now, Dad? She asked quietly. Thomas pulled her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Yeah, baby. I think we're going to be more than okay. The next months unfolded like a movie montage Thomas had never expected to star in. He gave notice at the warehouse, where Rodriguez looked genuinely sorry to lose him. His co-workers threw a party, complete with a cake that read "Good luck" in shaky icing. Marcus pulled him aside, eyes shining. You deserve this, man, Marcus said, gripping Thomas's shoulder. Whatever it is, wherever you're going, you deserve good things. Thomas started his new job in August, walking into Vincent's downtown office with the same nervous energy Sarah showed on her first day of school. The foundation occupied 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise, all glass and steel and quiet efficiency. His office had a view of the city that took his breath away. Philadelphia spread out below like a promise. His first project was working with a community center in North Philly that needed funding for after-school programs. Thomas spent days there, talking to the director, meeting the kids, understanding what they needed versus what other foundations assumed they needed. "We don't need new computers," the director, an elderly woman named Mrs. Washington, told him bluntly. "We need tutors. We need mentors. We need adults who show up consistently and give a damn." Thomas arranged for the foundation to fund a mentorship program, training and paying community members to work with at-risk youth. 3 months later, Mrs. Washington called him crying. "We've got 15 kids who've improved their grades," she said through happy tears. 15 kids who have someone believing in them. "You did that, Mr. Spencer." "We did that," Thomas corrected. "I just connected the dots." The house in Chestnut Hill became home slowly, room by room, memory by memory. Sarah claimed the biggest bedroom, painting it purple with Thomas's help, hanging her artwork on walls that had space to breathe. They planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes and basil and sunflowers that grew taller than Sarah. Thomas's sister visited, walking through the house with wonder on her face. "You deserve this," she said, echoing Marcus's words. "After everything you've been through, after how hard you've worked, you deserve this." But deserve was a complicated word. Thomas thought about his warehouse coworkers still loading pallets for $14 an hour. Thought about Mrs. Washington working 60-hour weeks for a fraction of his new salary. Thought about all the people doing essential, exhausting work who would never get rescued from an alley by a grateful millionaire. He mentioned this to Vincent over lunch one afternoon at an expensive restaurant where the menu didn't list prices. "Survivor's guilt," Vincent said, spearing an heirloom tomato. "I know it well. You think you don't deserve what you have because others have less. Don't I, though?" Thomas countered. "I got lucky. Right place, right time. What about everyone else?" "Then multiply the luck." Vincent set down his fork, intensity radiating from him. "That's what I'm trying to do, Thomas. That's what the foundation is for. We can't save everyone, but we can save some. And those we save can save others." Ripples. Thomas thought about that often in the following months as he worked on project after project. A job training program for formerly incarcerated people. Grants for small businesses in food deserts. Scholarships for first-generation college students. Each initiative felt like dropping a stone into still water, watching the circles expand outward. Sarah thrived in her new school, making friends easily, joining the science club and the debate team. She brought home report cards full of A's and talked about molecular biology with the confidence of someone who believed the future held room for her dreams. "I want to help animals," she told Thomas one evening as they cooked dinner together in their spacious kitchen. "But not just as a vet. I want to research diseases, find cures, make things better." "You can do that," Thomas said, and for the first time in his life, the words didn't feel like hollow encouragement. They felt like truth. One Saturday in November, almost a year after that night in the alley, Vincent invited Thomas and Sarah to a charity gala. Thomas had been to several such events in his new role, but this one was special, the foundation's annual fundraiser, where wealthy people paid $1,000 a plate to feel good about themselves while actually doing good. Thomas wore a rented tuxedo and felt like an imposter until Sarah told him he looked like James Bond. She wore a blue dress that made her look impossibly grown up, her hair styled by the neighbor's daughter who was studying cosmetology. The ballroom glittered with crystal and candlelight. Orchestra music floated through air perfumed with expensive flowers and more expensive wine. Thomas recognized some faces from television. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders whose net worth had commas in inconceivable places. Vincent found them near the entrance, smiling warmly. "Thomas, Sarah, you made it. Come. There are people you should meet." He introduced them to donors and board members, to people whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. Thomas shook hands, made small talk, and watched Sarah's eyes grow wider with each introduction. During dinner, Vincent stood to give a speech. The room quieted, attention focusing on the man who'd built an empire on calculated risks and strategic vision. "A year ago," Vincent began, "I nearly died. I won't share the details, but I will say that I'd lost faith in humanity. I'd come to believe that people only acted out of self-interest, that kindness was a myth we told ourselves to sleep better at night." He paused, letting the silence build. Thomas felt hundreds of eyes in the room, though none were on him yet. "Then a stranger saved my life. He didn't know who I was, didn't ask for anything in return. He helped because that's who he is, someone who sees suffering and responds with compassion. He's here tonight, and I want you to meet the man who changed my life and inspired this foundation's mission." Spotlight found Thomas, and suddenly everyone was looking. He felt his face flush, wanted to sink into his chair and disappear. But Sarah gripped his hand under the table, squeezing tight, and he found the courage to stand. "Thomas Spencer," Vincent continued, "former warehouse worker, current director of community outreach, and the best man I know. He reminds me every day that wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with it. That true richness is measured in kindness, in showing up, in choosing to help when it would be easier to walk away." The room erupted in applause. Thomas stood there, overwhelmed, as people he'd never met celebrated him for simply being decent. Vincent raised his glass. "To Thomas Spencer, and to everyone who chooses compassion. May we all be so rich." Later, after the speeches and the auctions and the networking, Thomas found Vincent on the balcony overlooking the city. November wind cut through the evening chill, but both men seemed content to stand in the cold. "You embarrassed me in there," Thomas said without heat. "I honored you. There's a difference." Vincent smiled. "How does it feel? The new life? Surreal, wonderful, scary." Thomas leaned against the railing, watching cars move through streets he'd walked when every day was a struggle. "I keep waiting to wake up. It's real. You made it real by choosing to stop that night." "No," Thomas said thoughtfully. "We made it real together. You by being vulnerable enough to accept help. Me by offering it. Both of us by believing people can be better than their worst moments." Vincent nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation, opening chapters in other cities, replicating what we're doing here. I'll need someone to lead that initiative." Thomas laughed. "Are you offering me another promotion? I'm offering you a chance to change thousands of lives instead of hundreds. If you want it." Thomas thought about Mrs. Washington's tears, about Marcus finding steady work through their job training program, about the small business owner who'd opened a grocery store in a neighborhood that had been a food desert for 30 years. He thought about ripples. "Let me talk to Sarah," Thomas said. "She's my partner in this. Has been from the beginning." Spring arrived again, completing the circle of a year that had transformed everything. Cherry blossoms exploded along Philadelphia streets, and Thomas drove through the city with Sarah beside him, both of them on their way to the community center for a special celebration. The mentorship program had expanded to 5 centers across the city. 47 students had improved their grades. 12 had won scholarships. And today they were graduating the first cohort of mentors, community members who'd completed training and were ready to guide the next generation. Thomas stood at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected the city's beautiful diversity. Mrs. Washington sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Behind her, students and mentors filled the room with an energy that felt like hope made tangible. "A year ago," Thomas began, "someone I barely knew changed my life. They saw me as valuable when I felt invisible. They believed I had something to offer when I'd stopped believing it myself." He glanced at Vincent, who stood at the back of the room, deliberately staying out of the spotlight. "Today, we celebrate people doing that same work. Mentors who show up, who believe in potential when it's buried under poverty and trauma and systems that weren't built for everyone to succeed. You're not just teaching math or reading. You're teaching people that they matter." After the ceremony, a young woman approached Thomas, a mentor named Jasmine who worked with middle school girls. She had tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply. This program gave me purpose when I'd lost it. My daughter sees me differently now, sees herself differently. That's everything. Thomas hugged her, feeling the weight and gift of connection. You did the work. I just held the door open. That evening, Thomas and Sarah cooked dinner together. Their Saturday ritual sacred and simple. They made pasta from scratch, rolling dough and cutting fettuccine while discussing Sarah's upcoming science fair project. She wanted to study antibiotic resistance in bacteria, a topic that made Thomas's head spin but filled him with fierce pride. Dad, Sarah said as they worked, flour dusting her cheeks, do you ever think about that night when you found Mr. Caruso? Sometimes, Thomas admitted. Why? I think about what would have happened if you'd walked past. If you'd been too scared or too tired or just not you. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen more wisdom than her years should hold. Our whole life changed because you were kind. Our life changed because someone recognized that kindness had value, Thomas corrected gently. Vincent could have walked away too, could have thanked me and forgotten. He chose to do more. I want to be like that, Sarah said firmly. When I'm successful, and I will be, I want to remember people like you and Mr. Caruso. I want to help. Thomas pulled her into a hug, holding tight to this brilliant, compassionate human he'd somehow helped create. You already do, sweetheart. Every day. Vincent called the next week with news. The foundation board had approved expansion into 5 new cities: Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, Oakland, and Houston. Each location would focus on community-driven solutions, hiring local people who understood the landscape, funding projects that addressed real needs rather than theoretical ones. I want you to lead it, Vincent said. Build the teams, establish the protocols, train the directors. It's a massive undertaking. I'll need to travel, Thomas said, thinking logistics. Sarah's still in school. Bring her when you can. Hire help when you can't. The foundation will cover everything. Nannies, travel, whatever you need. Thomas, you've proven you can do this. You've built something remarkable here in Philadelphia. Now let's build it everywhere. Thomas thought for 3 days before saying yes. He talked to Sarah, who'd become excited about seeing new cities. He talked to his sister, who promised to help with childcare. He talked to Mrs. Washington, who told him bluntly that he'd be an idiot to turn down the opportunity. You've got a gift, she said. You see people clearly. Don't waste that. The work consumed him in the best possible way. Thomas spent months visiting cities, meeting community leaders, and understanding local challenges. In Chicago, he funded programs, supporting families affected by gun violence. In Atlanta, he established job training for people transitioning out of homelessness. In Detroit, he helped launch a coalition of neighborhood gardens that addressed both food security and community building. Each city taught him something new about poverty and resilience, about systems that broke people and people who refused to stay broken. He hired directors who reminded him of himself, people who'd struggled, survived, and maintained enough heart to believe in change. 2 years after that November night. 2 years after that November night in the alley, Thomas stood in his office on a gray December afternoon, looking at a map of the United States dotted with pins. Each pin represented a community center, a job training program, a mentorship initiative, ripples that had become waves. His phone buzzed. Vincent. Turn on the news, Vincent said without preamble. Channel 6. Thomas grabbed the remote, flipping to the local station. A reporter stood outside a North Philadelphia community center, their community center, interviewing a young man Thomas recognized. Marcus, his former co-worker from the warehouse. The foundation gave me a chance when nobody else would. Marcus was saying, his infant son, now a toddler, balanced on his hip. I went through their job training, got certified as an electrician. Now I'm teaching other guys from the neighborhood. Passing it forward. You know? The camera panned to show other success stories. Jasmine, the mentor, now running her own nonprofit. Mrs. Washington accepting an award for community leadership. Faces Thomas knew, lives he'd touched, people who'd touched him right back. We did that, Vincent said softly through the phone. No, Thomas replied. watching Sarah enter his office with her homework, growing taller every day, her acceptance letter to MIT already framed on his wall. We're still doing it. That evening, Thomas drove through Philadelphia streets transformed by time but unchanged in essence. He passed the alley where his life had pivoted, now marked by a small community garden that Vincent had quietly funded. The warehouse where he'd once loaded pallets now had a training center on its second floor, teaching skills that led to real careers. He picked up Vincent for dinner, their monthly tradition. They went to a small Italian restaurant in South Philly, nothing fancy, where the owner knew their names and the pasta tasted like home. Sarah got into MIT, Thomas said as they waited for their food. I heard. She told me herself. Vincent smiled. Called to thank me for the trust fund. Very formal. Very professional. She's learning. She learned from watching you. Vincent sipped his wine. I've been thinking about succession planning. For the foundation. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You're not dying on me, are you? God willing, not anytime soon. But I'm 63, Thomas. Eventually, someone needs to take over. I want it to be you. The words hung between them like a challenge and a gift. Thomas thought about the warehouse worker he'd been, the man who'd measured his worth in overtime shifts and scraped together school supplies. That man still lived inside him, reminding him where he came from, who he'd been. I'm not ready, Thomas said honestly. You weren't ready to save my life either. You did it anyway. Vincent leaned forward. That's what readiness really is, showing up despite fear. You've been showing up for everyone else. Show up for yourself. Over tiramisu and espresso, they planned the future. New cities, new programs, new ways to multiply kindness until it became infrastructure, until compassion was policy rather than charity. They talked until the restaurant closed. Two men from different worlds who'd built a bridge and discovered they were standing on the same side. Thomas drove home to find Sarah still awake, studying molecular biology at the kitchen table. She looked up when he entered, questions in her eyes. How was dinner? Vincent wants me to run the foundation. Eventually, Sarah set down her highlighter. What did you say? That I wasn't ready. But you are. She said it with the certainty of someone who'd watched her father carefully for years. You've always been ready, Dad. You just needed someone to see it. Thomas sat beside her, looking at his daughter who'd become his wisest teacher. When did you get so smart? I had a good example. Later, alone in his bedroom, Thomas found the worn business card Vincent had given him that first morning. The attorney's number he'd never needed to call. He kept it all this time, a reminder of the moment everything changed. But he understood now that the moment hadn't been about Vincent's wealth or generosity. It had been about a choice in an alley on a rainy night. About stopping when walking past would have been easier. About believing that one person's actions mattered, even when the world suggested otherwise. Thomas opened his laptop and began writing an email to the foundation board, accepting Vincent's proposal. Not because he was ready, but because readiness was a myth. There was only doing or not doing, helping or walking past, showing up or staying home. He chose to show up. The next morning, Thomas woke early to make breakfast. Sarah shuffled in wearing her MIT sweatshirt, already claimed and beloved. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind shared by people who knew each other's rhythms. Today's going to be good, Sarah said, unprompted. Yeah, Thomas smiled. What makes you say that? Because every day is good now. Not perfect, good. There's a difference. She was right. The bills still came, the car still needed repairs, life still threw curveballs. But the baseline had shifted. They had space to breathe, room to dream, permission to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. Thomas drove Sarah to school, then headed to the office where his team was already gathering for their weekly meeting. They'd review projects, discuss challenges, celebrate wins. The work would never be finished. Poverty was too entrenched, systems too broken, need too vast. But they'd keep showing up anyway, keep building bridges, keep believing that one act of kindness, properly multiplied, could change the world. Thomas Spencer had saved a life in an alley 2 years ago. But the truth was more complicated and more beautiful. they'd saved each other, and the ripples were still spreading. Thank you for listening to the story of compassion, transformation, and the unexpected ways our choices ripple outward into the world. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about the power of kindness, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd subscribe to this channel. Your subscription helps these stories reach more people who might need to hear them.